morning. Public Advocate Jumaane Williams, who co-sponsored both bills. Public Advocate, thank you for being here.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk first and foremost about the NYPD ending stop and frisk 10 years ago, right? But it has really been replaced, as you know, by a series of different types of stops and interrogations. So before we get into the bill, can you explain the different levels of police stops and the kind of transparency that you are looking for here?
Yeah, first, we want to dispel some of the myths I've heard journalists and even folks from law enforcement saying. This has nothing to do with asking directions, saying hello, asking how the neighborhood is, asking the neighborhood deli owner what's going on.
So where did that confusion come from, that people assumed it was that was part of the equation?
Well, I believe the administration is purposely putting misinformation out. We see this happen every time we have discrepancies about transparency bills. We saw it 10 years ago when we were discussing the abuses of stop, question, and frisk. The reason that we're able to agree that there was abuses is because we had data. We have no data on what's called level 1 or level 2 stops. The stop and frisk are called level 3. They're 4 altogether. 4 is an arrest, just to simplify. And what the federal monitor dealing with the abuse of stop and question and frisk have said is that there is an underreporting of level 3s, which means that officers oftentimes are saying that they're level 1 and 2 stops when they may not be.
Okay.
So what we said is, let's just all look at the same data so we can all have the same picture of what's going on. And so he said, let's just get some information around the level 1 and 2 stops.
Mayor Eric Adams says the How Many Stops Act would actually endanger public safety. The NYPD chief, Madry, says that it would harm police and community relations. What's your response to that?
Well, the way they're describing it, they're correct, which is why we're not passing the bill that they're talking about. So the bill that we have only comes into play when you're asking investigatory questions or accusatory questions about a very specific thing. We're also not asking for any what's called pedigree information. So you don't need the name, you don't need the address. We're simply trying to get some demographics. It's about 4 or 5 questions that an officer can fill out on a drop-down on their phone.
Let me be very clear here, then. Let me be very clear, because the mayor said, point blank, I will not sign this bill. I will not sign it the way it is, right? So you're saying right now, if I go up to a police officer, say, hey, can you please tell me directions, how do I get to so-and-so on the 1 train, they don't have to file a report based on
Absolutely
that interaction?
Not. We actually wrote in the bill, and you can look at the bill, anyone can look at the bill online. The bill very specifically says, hope you can still hear me, I know it's frozen.
We hear you, I know, yep.
The bill very specifically says this is not for general communication or interaction with the community. It's very clear. We sent that to the mayor, and unfortunately, they're still giving misinformation. And it'd be easier if we can have this conversation about what it really is and not what it is not.
All right, at this point, let's move on to the ban on solitary confinement as a form of punishment. Do you have data on how often this practice is actually used? Does this ban prevent correction officers from using it to de-escalate situations?
We're going to hear you. I don't think we're going to see you, just so you know, but we want to hear your answer on this.
Apologies about that. But we had last year, I think, about 117 people put in what's called punitive segregation. What we do know is that however you call it, solitary, punitive segregation, all the data shows that when you have isolation for long hours, it not only harms you physically, psychologically, it actually increases the chances that you might get rearrested when you leave. And so what we said, we want to make sure you can only isolate people for the time period is needed to de-escalate whatever the immediate danger is, but you can separate them for much longer than that. And so this still allows for separation, and we're still allowing people to lose privileges and other things that people may think of to try to change behavior, but we want to increase the programming and other things that we know actually change behavior. What the corrections officers are pointing out, the dangers that are there, corrections officers being harmed, detainees being harmed and killed, those things are happening now, which says to us the use of solitary isn't working. We need to do something else.
All right, and last we're out of time here, and we're having trouble with the video here. I want to get your take on this. A lot of rumors, a lot of conjecture, I'm sure you've heard it, about whether or not there will be an indictment against Mayor Eric Adams. That's to be determined, right? But how ready are you to take over if that were to happen? And if it does, would you want to launch a mayoral campaign in 2024 and continue the job?
Well, I will say there was a hip-hop line that said, if it was a split, we'd all be high. There's a lot of ifs there. But I will tell you, a part of being public advocate is you're next in line of succession. And so we've always known that. But I just want to be clear. It's not a job that I ran for. I'm running for re-election come 2025.
So not running for mayor?
Not running for mayor in 2025, no. I'm running for re-election. That's the job I applied for. I think we're doing a good job. There's is a very unique position to be able to push the city and its leaders in a good direction, and that's a job I want to continue doing.
All right, Public Advocate Jumaane Williams, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Elected officials. And this last today, we're going to wrap up the final piece of our year-end review series, speaking with many of our elected officials. And this last interview highlights opinions from leaders within the Department of Juvenile Services, with youth crime as the focus.
WMER2 News' Brittany Verner spoke with Secretary Vincent Schiraldi, analyzing his first year in his role and what we can expect to see next year from his office as it relates to youth crime.
Secretary Vincent Schiraldi's role within DJS includes setting the mission and vision for the office, hiring the right people, and deploying the correct resources when it comes to public safety and rehabilitating kids involved in violence. He says next year they plan to continue this work in a way which helps young people turn their lives around. When it comes to youth crime in Baltimore City and throughout the state, it's a sensitive topic even for the leaders working to combat it.
Nobody wants more crime. Everybody wants this problem solved.
Maryland Secretary for the Department of Juvenile Services, Vincent Schiraldi, says they've implemented new initiatives this year to get to the kids early on.
The biggest, I think, achievement of the year is to launch the Thrive Academy, which is focused very specifically on the kids in our care most likely to be involved in gun violence.
These kids either had a history of prior arrests or recently lost a loved one to gun violence, and they are paired with a life coach and a specialized case manager.
The very first thing that will happen is they will sit down with that young person and their parents and say, this is the ramifications of gun violence. You could come to harm, you could harm somebody else, you could go to prison.
Diverting youth from gun violence and putting together resources to help them is the mission for Thrive Academy.
We can help them go to college. We can give them a stipended job or service learning experience to service to the community. We can actually move their family and them if they're in danger of coming to harm. We're going to expand to Prince George's County this month, Anne Arundel County next month, and then the rest of the state.
They also implemented a YES working group that's made up of prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the police collaborating to talk about the outcomes of the kids who participate in youth service programs so that every youth at risk for violence gets robust services. DJS also faced many challenges this year, especially as it relates to funding the youth programs.
There was a lot of cuts in services to kids that are involved in the system, and we have to kind of build that back up. One obvious example is there is literally not one residential drug treatment program that you can access if you're poor in the state of Maryland for an adolescent. Not one.
Schiraldi says over the past decade, cuts were made to juvenile services, programs like therapeutic group homes and individual in-home family services, to name a few, and they're working with the Department of Human Services to change that.
Juvenile justice system really is set up to help young people turn their lives around, rehabilitate them while simultaneously holding them accountable. And if you do both of those things, you improve public safety.
According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 4% is the national average of people who go into adult prison before they turn 18. In Maryland, that number is twice as high at 8%.
I think that's too many. Kids get tried as adults, and 90% of those young people are youth of color. They're Black and Latino. So I think the juvenile system could handle many of those young people, and then we have a lot more programs for them, and we make them less bad. The adult system has been shown to increase, not decrease, recidivism.
Something Schiraldi says needs to be looked at deeper.
We need to do a lot more work on fixing the way we administer youth justice.
Schiraldi says in 2024, they will analyze all of the youth programs that exist to identify which are most effective and eliminate what's not. In January, DJS will also be releasing data on the recidivism rates. But so far, Schiraldi says 92% of the kids they divert do not get reconvicted.
So you admit to receiving some of these and also sending some?
Absolutely.
Text messages sent to and from East Cleveland Police Chief Brian Gerhard
reveal apparent racist, anti-Semitic, and homophobic memes and messages.
It's tongue-in-cheek stuff. It's got nothing, there's no racism there. You can go online and find this stuff anywhere.
Some of the memes are too inappropriate for us to show you on TV. Take a look at the few we can show. This image, allegedly sent from Gerhard in 2019, shows a photo of Hitler with the words, "Have ADHD? I know a place I can send you to learn to concentrate." And there's this one, showing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with the words, "I had a dream, but James Earl Ray had a Remington." The inappropriate memes go on and on.
Hitler is in a lot of these, one of them saying live, laugh, love, and then it's quoted Adolf Hitler.
Absolutely, I remember seeing that one.
It's disgusting and appalling.
Attorney Kimberly Corral represents several East Cleveland police officers in cases unrelated to these messages, but her firm collected and sent the screenshots to 19 News. The messages date back as far as 2019. Corral says the fact that Gerhard has been policing in a mostly minority community for so many years is really cause for concern.
I mean, it calls into question every single investigation he's been a part of.
Do you think that these messages are okay?
Do I think that they're okay?
Yeah.
I think they're satire.
So people who are calling you, or people within the department who are saying that you are anti-Semitic or, racist, what do you say to those people?
Total bull. And if you're allowed to put that on the news, please do.
I reached out to the East Cleveland mayor's office, and the chief of staff told me that they have a zero tolerance policy for racism and anti-Semitism. He also said the situation is under investigation. I also spoke with the president of the East Cleveland City Council, and she says, well, she wants to see Gerhard step.
Juvenile crime is driving a lot of these sad statistics. Headed into 2024, city and county leaders have a plan to turn things around. Action News 5's Joyce Peterson joins us live with details. Joyce?
Yeah, Joe, last night we told you about Trevor Randall. The 18-year-old was charged in last week's deadly police pursuit, then released from 201 on his own recognizance. Well, NPD quickly picked him up again and charged him with more than a dozen new crimes, including breaking into multiple cars. 2 a.m. this morning, he was released again without having to pay bail. The plan of attack for local leaders is to rehabilitate, not incarcerate, troubled youth. 18-year-old Trevor Randall, not the only teen suspect released without bail after a crime involving death. A judge released 18-year-old Eddie White on his own recognizance, despite his alleged involvement in the murder of 15-year-old Anthony Mason. The Shelby County District Attorney's Office had asked for a $75,000 bond for White.
And also, crucially, enrollment in the Memphis Allies programs where the person will be constantly supervised and monitored so to prevent them from being able to reoffend while they're out on bail.
Rehabilitating, not incarcerating Memphis's troubled teens is the goal. Shelby County Juvenile Court Judge Tarek Sugarman successfully convinced the County Commission Monday to give him an extra $2.3 million to hire 21 more youth counselors.
I know what is needed. Trust me on this, if you will. This money will be well spent. These youth service officers will be well utilized in this community.
State Senator Brent Taylor this week announced plans to sponsor new legislation to hold parents financially responsible for their child's actions.
I think one reason parents aren't cracking down on their own kids is that in some cases, I believe the parents are benefiting from the spoils of the criminal activity of their kids.
Memphis Mayor Jim Strickland says the city is making extensive efforts to provide kids with active intervention. A $6 million grant allows Memphis Allies, the group D.A. Mulroy mentioned, to work with high-risk youth several times a week. And a new $40 million four-year grant will focus intervention initiatives in the 9 zip codes with the highest number of homicides. Delvin Lane, director of Street Intervention Team 901 Block Squad, says reducing crime requires a laser focus on the kids.
If we just take time to get involved with these young people and figure out, how can we help them and replace some of this pent-up rage and anger, I think we'll see a big change in our young people.
And for those young people who do wind up in jail, Shelby County opened a state-of-the-art youth detention center this year with more classrooms, culinary training, and lots of green spaces. The sheriff's office, which runs the facility, is also working on expanding the library and adding a music room. Live in studio tonight, I'm Joyce Peterson. Action.